We cover a lot of topics on HellaBass Live. A lot of it's based on angler interviews and techniques and how to catch more bass and all the things that maybe are the sexy fun talk of fishing. But sometimes we gotta have to have important topics that not. I think they can still be fun. It's definitely interesting, and I think they're essential. So hopefully you guys will find this interesting. But we're gonna get into the science of fishing a little bit and some of the things that may be threatening bass fishing and things that we all need to know as anglers. And so, as obviously, we're gonna bring in a guest that's an expert in that field to help us on HellaBass Live tonight. So welcome, Stephen Bardin. How's it going, Stephen?
Hey, Rich, good to see you, brother. We can make this sexy
Yeah,
too if you want. Those were some of the
yeah,
adjectives you used. We can go for that.
yeah. You can
We
like
may need
unzip
other
the quarter
guests.
zip a little bit and
Yeah, we could do a
and
little bit of that.
right on. So, yeah, I mean, if people, you've done some other podcasts. You're a regular member on the Real Biology for the serious
Yep.
angler. So, some people might be familiar with you, but maybe just a quick rundown of like, obviously, I think you work with MLF and the Bass Pro Tour, and you're in private fisheries management as well as some of the public stuff. So maybe just give you a little kind of a high level like how you're involved in guess some of the credentials that and why you're so passionate about fisheries management and bass in general.
All right. So I'm a fisheries biologist. I have a master's degree in fishery science. I have a bachelor's in freshwater biology as well. For any kids who are out there thinking about how do I do a fisheries program, I got my bachelor's first at Charleston State, master's at Texas A&M. Um, I've been doing fisheries management since 2006, so this is my 20th year. In 2010, I started a lake management company, private lake management, called Texas Pro Lake Management. What we do, Rich, is manage trophy fisheries across the state of Texas. I have a handful of biologists that work for me. Kenyon Klein, which is Gary Klein's youngest daughter, a young man named Tommy Johnson, who is he's a really good hand. He went to Iowa for his master's and then worked for Texas Parks and Wildlife shortly before joining our team. They do mainly like the day-to-day field work, visiting the clients and executing the programs. I still get to do quite a bit of that with them. And then, yeah, as Major League Fishing announced the Bass Pro Tour in 2019, behind the scenes since 2017, we have been working on what is their kind of conservation focus. And we do that through a company that I co-own with Gary Klein called Black Bass Stewardship Group. We build conservation-based elements around your brand, your company, really find your conservation message. And Major League Fishing hired us. So I serve officially as the director of the fisheries management division for them. And we have four pillars of kind of work that we do, and we can go over some of that if you want. Those pillars are fish care, which is essential to all of us that tournament fish. Fisheries enhancement, which is kind of that habitat and water quality side of it. Research, and we partner with a lot of agencies as well as universities to conduct our research, as well as doing independent stuff on our own. And then finally, education. And that's, man, Rich, that's like coming onto your show and talking
There we go.
about the fish we love and the fisheries that we want to take care of.
Yeah, working overtime.
Absolutely.
All right. So HellaBass Live, presented by Arsenal Fishing, boosted by Powerhouse Lithium. Shout out to the companies that support us and support the show. And obviously, there's discounts code down in the description, whether you're watching the replay or live, if you want to support those companies. And I think where I'd like to start tonight is really like speaking of pillars.
Yeah.
Like a three-legged. What is the three-pronged? Like what are the three biggest concerns from your perspective, from a fisheries biologist standpoint, that anglers really should be more aware about in let's say 2026? Like what are the biggest concerns, and then maybe we can see like how we should combat those, but let maybe just lay those out, like from your perspective, from a science fisheries perspective. What are the three biggest threats to bass fishing as we enjoy it?
Okay. Can we start in 1960? Would that be okay?
Yeah,
So
I
too
mean,
far back?
if it started then, it's still a threat today, then it's
Yeah.
definitely fair game.
Yeah. Well, the 1960s are some of the most important time for bass fishing. And that's because that's the height of reservoir building in the United States. That's when the majority of our reservoirs, like we peaked in the mid 60s in building reservoirs. And we've slowly declined in building new reservoirs. We also know that the late 60s is kind of it's the birth of Bassmaster, Ray Scott, some of those first tournaments like at Beaver Lake. So our heritage starts then. Today, we build reservoirs at a rate slower than we did in the 1800s. We've actually only built one new reservoir in the United States over 10,000 surface acres in the last 30 years. That's pretty sobering. That means that the reservoirs that you're going to compete on are the same reservoirs that Bill Dance competed on.
Right.
The difference is Bill was on those fisheries when they were 10 years old or younger. In our fisheries, when you impound a reservoir, you have what's called the new lake effect. That's when habitat is highly abundant, forage is available, bass are growing at an exponential rate because we haven't hit the carrying capacity or like the biomass, the amount of fish and the amount of fish weight that the lake can support. It hadn't hit that yet. So the fish just could grow at an exponential rate. At some point, you kind of hit that carrying capacity and then you stagnate. And now we're on the other side of that. We are in a reservoir aging cycle. So the first thing that every angler across the U.S. should be concerned with is if you fish a reservoir, and that would be something that has a man-made dam that impounds a river, stream. But if you're fishing a reservoir, and that reservoir is aging, and as they age, they're going to accumulate silt from the watershed. The habitat's going to decompose slowly. So any of that standing timber, slowly it's going to start to decompose. It's going to get buried in silt. That siltation is going to change what we call the littoral zone. The littoral zone is the area of the lake where plants can grow. It's going to change not just that bottom hardness, but also just the depth. And our reservoir storage is going to go down. And for bass anglers, what matters the most is your carrying capacity is going to go down. The lakes are going to get less productive over time. So whenever we talk about like, oh man, this is a heavy topic just to come out of the gate with, but we constructed these reservoirs in the 60s. They've been aging at a known rate. Eventually, they're going to be bland again, unless we have like a huge infrastructure bill and we go in and we remove sediment and we work towards how do we make them young again. Now, there are some programs that kind of exist that I would say they create some band-aids around this topic. You do see some reservoirs that will have a new lake effect that happens periodically. I think of OHIV in Texas is one of those. If you're on social media, you've seen OHIV. You've seen what it's done with the Share Lunker program over the last 5 years. OHIV was impounded in the 1980s, so it's one of the younger reservoirs, probably like in the U.S. It's probably within the last it's definitely within the last 10 reservoirs built in the U.S. But it was impounded in the 80s, had a new lake effect. That ended in mid-90s. And then it fluctuates because it's on the Colorado River, so it has these big drought cycles. It'll fluctuate 20 or 30 feet, vertical feet, during a drought. And we go through these drought cycles and they break every 10 years. And whenever they get into a flood cycle, they get a new lake effect. So OHIV is like having these pulses of this really cool where terrestrial vegetation grows during a drought. The fish abundance gets constricted because of the water volume we have. Then it floods out for 5 or 6 years, and then we have a larger carrying capacity that the fish can then grow into. So we get a new lake effect in a reservoir like Ivy. We don't have many that are built that way, and that's not going to last forever either. But the first topic that every angler should be concerned with is reservoir aging. Across the country, it's universal. Most other topics are going to be regional or geographic specific because every reservoir is a little different. Every use is a little different. The impacts of the local watershed and the environment, even the species in the reservoir are different. But on a universal scale across the country, reservoir aging is kind of the number one thing that we should be concerned with. Luckily, we do have programs like the National Fish Habitat Partnership, and one of those partners is the Reservoir Habitat Partnership. That this is the group of agencies and angler groups that are coming together to address some of the reservoir issues we have. So it's not like we're ignoring any of this. We're attempting to make it better. But Rich, that's the first one.
Sure.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. So that's kind of a comment here. So Darius says Kentucky Lake is a rock pile, and the silt has been washed from the system, leaving more rock.
Yep. Yeah. But we got to remember that is staying in the system. So it's leaving Kentucky Lake, and where does it go next? Because that sediment doesn't get washed onto the bank and accumulate. That sediment washes downstream. So at some point we get Kentucky Lake acts more like a river based on how it floods out.
Mm-hmm.
You get a broader, deeper reservoir where that water has time to slow down and that sediment drops out. And so we do see that as we move through these systems, whenever we have multiple dams, we see that the sediment will impact each one slightly different. Yeah, but that's good.
And obviously, like they don't. You kind of said they all age, but they don't all age at the same rate, right? Like a table rock doesn't age the same as like a lowland, a lowland reservoir, more traditional, right?
Yeah,
like
what's protecting it is shape and watershed. Whenever you think about watershed, what is on the watershed? Yeah. Is it farmland? Is it standing timber?
Right.
Is it a neighborhood?
Like Ross Barnett is going to age much faster than a table rock.
Absolutely. Yeah, carrying more sediment from a further distance, dumping it in, and that's the thing is, the sediment is like a really fine silt. There's not much you can do with it. We can't build infrastructure out of it. We can't push it up into islands or points. We can't build anything out of it.
Yeah, I mean, we see a lot. We are blessed with natural lakes that have a slightly different, right? I think some of our shallower lakes, right? I think we do have weeds dying, creating sediment. They silt. So some of our shallow lakes do have that threat a little bit in Minnesota, but we also have an abundance of lakes. But the Mississippi River, right, upper Mississippi River, I mean, the siltation and re-dredging of the shipping channel and silting along the locks, and it's a constant battle for the Corps of Engineers, and obviously they're fighting it more from a navigation standpoint. There is maybe a small component of wildlife and fishery habitat to some of that on what they do with rebuilding islands and rock walls and things like that. But you see probably more of an accelerated change. I mean, the Mississippi River changes rapidly with siltation, sandbars, wild rice growing and choking off areas, things like that.
Right. Well, and you see in your natural lakes, you do still see a sign of aging and sedimentation. Mm-hmm. It's not an accumulation of sediment, but it's what that sediment brings, which is nutrient. And I think that you could say over the last 10 years, you've started to hear about blue-green algae or harmful algal blooms. And we've never had that to where we were talking about, but that's something that's been here for millennia. We just are now, through these aging processes, we're accumulating the type of nutrient, the phosphorus, that drives those algal blooms, especially in summer months. And we can find the signs anywhere we look. And that boils down to mainly watershed practices. What we're doing in the watershed, and the fact that, of course, your natural lakes, we didn't build, but we managed the land around them. And then our reservoirs, we really didn't build for fishing. They were built for power generation or protecting people from floodwater or providing water for municipal use. But fishing was way down on the list, if it was even a thought in the construction of a reservoir.
Absolutely. Yeah, you kind of mentioned OHIB booming, and I think we saw, as a fan of the sport, right? I think the early 2000s, Amistad and Falcon were on a
Yeah,
new cycle, right? Like they weren't
correct.
new reservoirs, but they were definitely in a new cycle boom back then.
Yeah,
They're getting pretty low. They're if we ever do get the water back, they're sitting on another boom potentially.
yeah.
Uh, that's a whole other conversation whether they're going
You
to
look
get
at
that
the
water or not.
entire Western U.S. I mean, you talk California.
Yeah, Mead.
California is rebounding
Yeah,
from a 5-year drought. They're rebounding right now, and we're seeing some big fish coming quick out of some of the California lakes. Arizona, I mean, they almost broke their state record twice last year. It's definitely one of those topics like we need to be aware of it, and it really for us, middle-aged men that are fishing, middle-aged women that are fishing. This is not really an issue that we're going to have to face. Like we're not going to lose the reservoirs in our lifetime, but generations behind us, our kids and our grandkids, they are going to be the ones that have to do something about this, or the reservoirs are just not going to be there.
Ed mentions that in the Northeast, the tidal rivers in general are cleaner. Uh, Delaware River's better than ever was, and I guess that's probably more just regulations,
Yep,
things
that's
like
you
that,
can
like commercial laws and things like that. I'd imagine, right?
guys, you can look at the 1990s and the Clean Water Act, and the Clean Water Act. You're seeing the direct results of that. There was a time, if you look in the 80s, you wouldn't fish those fisheries. You wouldn't put a boat on it because you would say catching a fish here would not be the best for my health. And today we look at them and they're unbelievable. And that is the Clean Water Act.
Yeah. So I guess you kind of started on that. What you said most of the other ones are regional, but what do you think are the next couple worth
Yep.
mentioning?
There's two more that I always love talking about, and we'll take the easiest one first. That's going to be loss of access. Regionally, this is an issue. You're going to have not the large reservoirs, not really our tournament waters, uh, so to speak, but more of those medium to small size impoundments that are municipal owned or power company owned. What we're seeing is those are privatized bodies of water that the state regulates the fisheries around, but they typically don't own the lake or the access. And we've seen a number of them sell and sell to private companies that are putting in subdivisions and golf courses and things like that. And whenever that happens, um, there's several examples here in Texas. Like you lose access, you don't fish those fisheries anymore. You don't get them. We also see that same thing in Louisiana, in part, especially in the bayou. We see a lot of areas that are restricted access. We see that around marinas, across all, even our major reservoirs or major water bodies. We see that access to fishing is actually becoming more restrictive over time. And this is one where your local club matters. Um, anytime something like this is going to happen, the sale of a state resource or the close of a state resource, there is always our ability to participate in the public comment section. We can go to meetings, we can stand up and we can say, as bass anglers or as tournament anglers, here's why access is important to this. And we can lobby for those to remain open. But we don't show up. We just don't. And you could even take like come out of the access question and go to any real fisheries regulation, anything that requires a public comment. Bass anglers historically just we don't participate in that part. Part of it is we don't know where to get that information, what's happening, and how to participate. Um, but the other part is we're kind of too busy actually engaging in the sport to realize that these small things are happening on a Wednesday night in August when we
Yeah.
want to be out, doing doing a paper tournament. There's somebody that's having a meeting that's saying we're going to change the regulation on this fishery, or we're gonna actually close that boat ramp. Um, those little things, and Bass Fisher does a really good job um, with the Bass Nation. of, making sure each conservation director knows what access issues are happening. And if you don't know your state conservation director for Bassmaster, you should get to know them, because they're going to have that local information for you, and they're going to be able to tell you, hey, it's time to mobilize. Let's get the 30 guys in your club and the 30 guys in this club, and let's all go together and show a force to make sure that they, whoever is making those decisions knows that this is important to our community.
Yeah, and I definitely, that's, it takes on a lot of different shapes and forms. In Minnesota, we've definitely had increasing permit requirements across the state. So like that's, and some of that is probably needed, but like the more barriers and things, you see, they can easily, increase insurance requirements and make it cost prohibitive to have small tournaments and things like that. So that's just another way of like restricting access.
Lost access. Yeah. I mean, Rich, I think of two more examples. One of those examples is the state of Alabama. But now if you're going to compete in Alabama, I don't care how long you've been doing it. I don't care if you are Kevin Van Dam or Bill Dance. You are going to take a boater safety course and have a current this year's boater safety course. Without that, you can't compete. Okay. That is a reaction to things that have happened over the last 18 months. Tragedies that have happened, and it may not be a bad thing. Like, this may make our sport safer, and that's always great. But it is something that you have to be aware of now. You don't just need a fishing license. You don't just need a life jacket, a whistle, a flotation device. You need a boater safety course. The other side of that is I sit through dozens of fisheries meetings every year. I serve on several state boards, on their black bass committees or review of their black bass plans. I go to a ton of scientific meetings for like American Fishery Society and Society of Lake Management Professionals. And one of the questions I often ask agency biologists is just how many tournaments happen in your state or happen on your water body? And that question is really hard to answer. They have to qualify, well, what is a tournament? Do we even have a registration system? And you'd be surprised because the majority of states do not. That registration system is going to start becoming more popular. We've seen it in New York.
Robust
y'all have
requirements.
Y'all have a big one. Whenever, like, I've never participated in it, but at Major League Fishing, if you go to the Kentucky headquarters, they have a huge room with these whiteboards on every wall, and they have each league, and they're trying to like work the calendar and then figure out, well, what permits do we need and how do we, who's in charge of contacting that agency or that lake authority and getting the permits. They're moving around the calendar. It is an overwhelming, hectic mess, which is only going to get worse if every tournament has to be registered with the state. But at the same time, if we want to someday be able to have conversations about, should the Bassmaster Classic be on the same water body that a 300 boat high school tournament is happening on in the same weekend? Like, it's whose job is it to figure out who's on that body of water and how many boats, and how do we make that safe for everybody to compete in? We got to have somebody that's doing it. And right now it's regulated basically by the leagues individually. And I think that long term, I think the agencies are going to take that, as you've seen in Minnesota, New York, and you've seen Michigan, several states, Oklahoma,
California,
more recently. Yep, that is an access issue for us that we can be part of the solution for. As the sport continues to grow.
Yeah. And in Minnesota, we see like a lot of our lakes are highly populated by lakeshore owners, and they have increasingly strong lakeshore owner alliances on these lakes where they're working with the cities and counties. And, we definitely working through the local Bass Nation conservation group, Clearwater Lake, northwest of the cities, half hour, they worked really hard, and they were trying to get into like some, like, under the guise of, I'm not saying invasive species inspection and cleaning is not important, but they were putting in super strict stuff that would basically, the only way you could basically be there is if you live there, right? They were making it so that you'd have to like dry your boat off for, a month and have an inspection and all this stuff. So basically it would basically disallow anybody access that didn't live there, right?
Correct. Yep.
So those are the kind of things that we all need to be concerned about, I think, at some level in our local areas.
Yeah, and you said it, and I'll make sure that we say it one more time. Your local Bass Nation conservation director has that information. I always, in every show I talk, you need to learn who your biologist is. If you fish the same water bodies repetitively, learn who at the state is managing that fishery. Because they may have like a newsletter, they may have like an email chain that you can jump on, subscribe to. But they will also, if you just give them, this is who I am, these are the things I'm interested in, let me know when you have a meeting, I will be there. They'll do that because they need angler support to show up, because they're having those same conversations with the HOAs and they're having the same conversations. They need somebody who's on their side saying, this is what the angling community actually would like.
And Darius just made a comment to somebody else saying that, so they said in New York, boaters require a safety course for all boaters. And Darius says it'll never fly here in Kentucky. And I'm like, well, it's flying in Alabama, so I don't see any reason why it won't fly in Kentucky soon enough. So that is not a way to think about like to think that it's not going to happen where you are is not practical.
No, and you should be part of that conversation. That's my point, is don't let these access issues snowball to where you find out you've lost access without being part of that conversation. Yeah, so that's number two.
To some degree, having some boater safety certificate instruction is probably good, but it shouldn't be just held to tournament anglers, right? It should be recreational anglers as well, right? Like the person in a wake boat, somebody getting out a 300 horsepower jet ski for the first time, like they need that training just as much as somebody getting in a 20-foot bass boat.
Absolutely. Yeah, at 16, my dad had me take a boater safety course. Before I could go out on the water by myself, you have to take this. I don't look back on that and say, it changed everything about me. I was still a young 16-year-old kid that probably did really stupid things at times. But there are pieces of it that I still remember today. Now I'm 40. I should have probably taken a refresher at some point. I'm on a boat every single day. There's things that we do in the private sector that if we were on public reservoirs, we would have to change. And, I am a business owner, so I do look at it from like a staffing perspective. And I don't require my staff to take a boater safety course, but it's not a bad idea, Rich.
I think in Minnesota, back when I was, I took it because that was the only way I could operate the boat without like from a certain age range, right? Until, whether it was from like 13 to 18 or whatever, like then I could operate a outboard without having a parent. So I took it so that I could go fish it, so.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. What's
the
third?
The third one is controversial. Get your ban button ready or the comments ready. The truth of the matter is we've taken catch and release too far. And if you haven't had a biologist on the show, I'm going to say that 80%, 90% of your audience has heard this if they've heard any other biologist talk. They hear us saying, we've taken the catch and release aspect and we're not harvesting enough fish from our systems. You can see that in regulation change. You look at Oklahoma, you look at Florida, they're now begging you to take more small fish out. That's two parts to this. Number one, in a lot of the systems, it's not that the fish don't grow as quickly, it's that the carrying capacity is different. So we need to make room for those fish. And we have a lot of competition. We have a lot of different fish species that are commingling in these bodies of water. And as bass anglers, we want the bass to succeed. We want them to grow to a large size. whether it's tournament or just fun fishing, we want them to grow to a large size. Well, bass grow through what's called indeterminate growth. That means there's no age dependent size associated with them. Genetically, if they can grow to 10 pounds throughout their lives, they will, as long as forage is available and the water temperature is correct for the metabolism to produce that size. We can't really solve for that water temperature side of it. The forage side of it is limited by what the reservoir or the body of water can produce. Their ability to capture that forage is primarily dictated by competition. If we have too many small fish in the system, they just simply won't grow. So what we see a lot of times now is we have older fish that have matured and are these large individuals. And then we have juvenile fish that stunt into a size class. And unfortunately, a lot of our regulations have pushed this. Whenever we say you can only harvest fish once they hit 14 inches, well, that was because we wanted our fish to reach a size of maturity and protect them to spawn for 1 or 2 seasons before they were harvested, back when 80 and 90% of fish were harvested in the fishery. Today, that's not how we as anglers operate. And we catch that 13-inch fish, and it's not legal for us to harvest, so we must release it. But then when it becomes a 14 or 15-inch fish, we don't think about the fact that that fish could be 5 or 6 years old. And in the southern United States, that fish's life is 10 to 12. If that fish is a male, it's guaranteed to not ever exceed 5 or 6 pounds. And it's taking up space. We have the responsibility, kind of the social responsibility, to when we're in tournaments, we need to protect the fish that we're catching and we're bringing to the weigh-in, because those are the biggest individuals in the population. Those should always be released. It's when we're fun fishing or when we're practicing and we're catching those legally allowed to be harvested fish, the 10, 12, 14-inch fish. We need to harvest more of those. And there are some areas in the United States where we have other bass species, like the Alabama bass, that have been introduced that complicate this issue more, because the Alabama bass will hybridize with our native bass, like the largemouth, like the smallmouth, and like the spotted bass. And actually, because of their genetic traits and their ability to spawn over a wide temperature range in a lot of different habitat types, they'll hybridize with all 3 bass species and slowly start to remove them from the system and create these Alabama hybrids that don't grow to a large size. So we've taken this catch and release motto kind of to the extreme, and you're seeing response by agency, but the response by agency so far has been, let's remove some of the regulation and see if the population will change. And it's not, because we're not participating in the harvest. So then we're basically proving to agencies that you don't need to change the regulation because we're not going to participate. So that tool of harvest is not functioning correctly across the United States. Now, once again, situationally, certain areas of the country, like you can have a conversation that harvest is still occurring. There are parts of the country where harvest is at 30 to 40%. But there are also way more parts of the country where harvest is single-digit percentage. And the regulation is really not built to harvest the right fish. And they're not going to change it because we don't participate. It's very complicated.
It is. And it is, like, there's a lot of, like, I remember going to Amistad back when the elites were there, and there was people jumping on the bandwagon, and there was 5, 6, 7 pounders getting their heads knocked off at an alarming rate in the fish cleaning houses by people that were just anglers, right? Like, so I mean, you do have pockets and things like that, and you hear about it in like Toledo Bend, right? Like on the Louisiana side of the reservoir, it seems like the harvest is plenty high from the sounds of it. Things like that.
Yeah, it's even there. It's slowing down, and that's the hard part. Is We all buy a fishing license, and I'm in Texas. I'm allowed 5 fish over 14 inches statewide. If I'm competing in a tournament, I'm going to cull through my fish throughout the day because I'm legally allowed to do that. And I'm going to bring the 5 biggest fish to the weigh-in. And the argument for, well, tournaments may have mortality, so doesn't that help? Those are the wrong fish. We need great fish care in our tournaments because we want those fish to go back. Those are the fish, and Auburn University kind of proved this in a recent study at the Coosa River on Neely Henry. The fish that are weighed in a tournament on average were younger at the same length and weight than the fish sampled by your agency using electrofishing, which means whenever you look at the entire population, let's say these fish are 18 inches. We're just using an example. They're 18 inches. Whenever I electrofish an 18-inch fish in the Coosa River, maybe a 6-year-old. But when you as an angler catch an 18-inch fish and weigh it in at a tournament, it has a better body condition score, or what we call relative weight, and it's a younger fish by a year. So it's a 5-year-old. That means it's a more aggressive, faster growing fish. You took it to a weigh-in, you may have mortality, may not, but regardless, that's the wrong fish. It's the fish that took 6 or 7 or 8 years to get to 18 inches that we really wanted out of that system. And if we could have done it when it was 14 inches, that would have provided resources for these fast growing fish to grow even faster.
I mean, do you think obviously I've mentioned selective harvest.
Yep.
I think it's in some of the fisheries, it's very obvious, right? You go to some fisheries and it's like you can catch, 50, 10 to 13 inch bass a day. And it's pretty clear at that point that like somebody should be harvesting those fish. Otherwise this, do you think the tournaments, the organizations have to demonstrate it to like have any meaningful like shift in society, or is that like political suicide to do that?
I have jokingly said to Kevin, hey, if you want to do the biggest conservation move ever, is on live whenever you catch a scoreable bass and it's a 1.5, it's a 14-inch fish, turn around to the camera and say, I'm going to take this one back and fillet it and drop it in the live well.
I was gonna I actually wanted to bring this up to you because I think back to you guys had a tournament on Norman, right? A lake that absolutely is ripe for selective harvest, right?
And it has Alabama bass, so we can talk about Lake Norman specifically if you want, but Alabama bass.
Right. So I thought at the time, and I think it was a red crest, maybe you've had some other events, but like
it was. Yep.
We anglers probably would have to take life jackets and whatever they were storing in their live wells on the BPT out. But like if every angler probably caught 5 12 to 14 inch fish throughout the day that they could have harvested, and it could have been it would have done a lot of good for the lake. B, it could have been a good educational moment. And I wonder if I want to know, was that ever actually seriously considered, or has ever been considered at like a level like that?
It has not been considered in that way. This is what's hard. I can remember Mark Daniels Jr. I can remember Jacob Wheeler, Alton Joe Jr. I think the first couple years of the BPT, I can remember them catching walleye during competition and putting them in their live well to take home to eat. Why can you do that, but you wouldn't do the same thing for an Alabama bass?
I think there's like this fear from the tournament organizations from a political standpoint to not do that.
Well, we have one side of it, which is you're active in a competition, and that is a legally scoreable fish. For us, we call them scoreable bass. That's a legally scoreable bass. That's a gray area. But I also have in our rules we have an amendment to our rules to allow an angler to live well a fish for a scientific purpose. So if we're competing in Texas and you catch a share lunker January to March, if we're competing in now Arkansas and you catch what they call a legacy lunker, so fish over 10 pounds January to March, our anglers are allowed to put those in the live well. Whenever we when we were in Michigan a couple of years ago, we were doing a research project with Michigan State University Veterinary Lab, looking at skin lesions on largemouth bass. Day one of competition, our anglers were legally allowed, if they caught a smallmouth with a big skin lesion, they were allowed to put it in their live well and bring it back to donate. So I could write in the rule that scientifically we're trying to do this. I think what is more realistic is, once again, you need to know your local biologist. Get with your local biologist and say, this weekend, we would like to host a harvest tournament. And instead of rewarding somebody for biggest fish, let's reward people for the most fish. Now, what you're going to need is an exemption for the day to be over your legal limit of fish, which means, the biggest, hardest hurdle there is actually on the regulatory side, because your law enforcement division and your fisheries division in all states are separate departments. So your biologist would have to get whatever your game warden or wildlife police, you'd have to get them to also sign off on this to let you have more than your legal limit for the day. But that would be, you talk about Norman, like you could have a 200 boat tournament, and dude, me and you could load up 150 fish in a day. Easy.
Of how many Zoom trick worms you wanted to burn through that day.
Exactly. Till you're just tired. You're just clicking them off on a clicker because you're like, it just doesn't matter. Those are the things that would improve those fisheries. Now, you could take, you take kind of the northeastern part of the United States, and you have the same issue. You have this issue of these fish are stunted. We call it stunted whenever they've kind of grown to a certain length and the resources don't allow them to grow any larger. So they just start to create age and stay the same length. That's stunting. They may have even a good body condition. They may be little fat fish, but they're just not getting enough resources. It takes 10 pounds of forage in a year to gain 1 pound on a bass. Plus they have to eat their body weight times 5. So if I have a 14-inch fish that's 1 pound, the first thing it has to do that year is eat 5 pounds of forage. To get to a 2 pound, it now needs an additional 10 pounds. So it actually needs 15 pounds of forage by the time that year's over. A 14-inch bass eats approximately a 3-inch bluegill. There's 30 bluegill to the pound. So it needs 450 bluegill in that year to grow to 2 pounds. Like, you can do that math. And you could reverse engineer this and say, well, for every 14-inch fish you pull out this year, Rich, you save 450 bluegill. The retail value of a bluegill is 75 cents. So you save $325. Like, I can tell you what that's worth.
Sure.
But my point, I don't really remember. No, my point is, in the Northeast, your growing season is slightly shorter. In your fish resources, the fish just don't grow at as fast of a rate. So the fish are stunted currently. We can catch a lot of 12 to 14-inch fish. But if we remove them from the system, the rebound is slower. And there's some of those systems that the fish don't even grow to 12 to 14 inches. So it's not even that we can catch a lot of 12 to 14-inch fish. They just don't exist in the population because they're not getting that big. So some of these are very complex. But whenever we talk about areas that have really great growing season, high abundance, we got good to moderate fishing pressure, we just need a population that's willing to participate in harvest.
But, and I guess it's the selective harvest, right? We don't necessarily need
Correct.
people taking their limits of 3 to 5 pounders, right? Ideally,
No, that
these
doesn't
are
help. That doesn't help.
right, the 1 to maybe 2 pound fish. And obviously, like, if you were going to do it like scientifically, you'd want to like take the fish, weigh it, put it on its the calculator or the health index, and say for a 13-inch, if it was above 1.3 pounds, then it's healthy. If it's less, then you should take, right? Like, that's how you guys do it on pond management, right? Like, you guys are.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, we have calculators. My cell phone every day, I input hundreds of fish. As we're electrofishing, or as we're selectively harvesting fish using angling, we're inputting a fish and we're making reaction based on how does that fish compete in this environment. Now, in a private pond situation, we've kind of maximized all the things that allow fish to grow, because there's really 5 components of fish growth. One being genetics, one being forage availability, one being habitat, one being water quality, and then one being this competition that we can manipulate via harvest. So we're already maximizing all those things. So the harvest is like the easy last part, right? This fish has habitat and water quality that's excellent. This fish has forage of every size available to it. Like, why is it not doing well? Well, it's either genetics or it's age, but it's got to come out of the system. Like, that's easy. In our public bodies of water, we don't control all of those dynamics all the time. There are cyclic years. You go back to OHIV, that conversation of OHIV. In certain years, OHIV's forage production is different. So you can't necessarily judge those fish as well. And this is what makes it so hard is we basically have to do statewide fisheries management as a reactive process rather than a proactive. And because of how the regulation system works, you might have a biologist who does a sampling this year in 2026, writes the recommendation, it gets through his office or her office in 2027. It makes it to the review committee, a board like what I would sit on for the state at the end of 27, and we say, yes, you should put that up as a regulation change for 28. Then it goes to the commission in 28 and is approved to start in 29 for the work that happened in 26. By the time all that happens, it may not be the regulation we need anymore. And so that system is a little bit broken, and we need to streamline that. But once again, we don't have proof of concept, because the states that have said, here's what we'll do a statewide regulation to allow you to harvest fish, like Oklahoma and like Florida. We don't participate. And so when we don't participate, they then go in front of all the rest of the scientific community, present the data, and they say, our harvest was this, we changed the regulation, and our harvest changed to this number. And if that number doesn't increase, then it's proof of concept that we don't participate.
And then Ed kind of brings up a unique situation, right? And I think you touched on all this, like, what are the size of those fish being harvested by the ice fishermen? What is the carrying capacity of that lake? What is the forage basin? That, like, there's so many factors, even though they're 20 miles apart, that it's hard to pinpoint on any one thing. That doesn't necessarily mean that harvest is bad. It could be the wrong harvest. It could be a lot of other factors, right?
Well, and like, Ed's talking about, ice fishing. I mean, he's in Pennsylvania going off of the regulation that's allowed there. I'm not going to lie and say I know the difference between Pennsylvania and New York's regulation. I don't. I know that New York has a closed season. They have a closed season because they are protecting fish that have delayed maturation and no real sexual dimorphism in the smallmouth. The smallmouth males and females look similar, grow to a similar size. They mature fairly late in life, and then they begin to produce eggs in those, November, December, January months. So they're protecting those fish so that then they can get a good spawn off in the spring. I understand that. For largemouth, it's slightly different. We have sexual dimorphism in largemouth, which just means that males and females physically are different as they age. We can't see them and sex those fish well and say that's a male versus a female unless that fish is over 6 pounds. If a fish is over 6 pounds and it's a largemouth, 99.999% of the time, that's female. You know that. Which means anybody who has had a 40-pound bag probably have 5 females.
Yeah.
Those fish are the ones that are damn important.
Ben, I would argue that a 1 pound smallmouth or a 1 pound largemouth tastes like a big bluegill or a big perch.
Your fish flavor is often dictated primarily by the algae that grows in water. Because I can eat bass from a small farm pond and don't really enjoy it. I can eat bass from where you are, and it's pretty great.
Yeah, I think it is mostly the stigma, right? I think this
Yep.
is largely the good, like I think you tried to say, like the great work that Ray Scott started has the pendulum has just swung too far to the other side at this point.
Yeah, listen, if Ray had not came up with the catch and release,
Don't
the
kill your
live
catch
weigh-in,
was what he first called it.
yeah, don't kill your catch. If that didn't happen, we would not be talking about fishing right now, because bass would be an extinct species. They'd be gone. They'd be wiped off the earth. Like, we wouldn't have them, because every fish was harvested, and at that point there were still a 15 fish limit. So they were harvesting every fish. I mean, that saved it. Now, even so, if you look at like the history of Bassmaster, day one, agencies were against don't kill your catch. They wanted the anglers to kill the fish. The reason they wanted them to kill the fish is because they didn't actually think that we could take care of the fish and release them back into the environment and them survive long term. They thought what would happen is the fish that were put back in the environment would have a delayed mortality that was noticeable, like we would have hundreds of dead fish floating up in the days after the event, and that they would pass on things like bacteria to the fish that were non-tournament fish that were in that general area, and that it would cause some real disease and mortality in our fisheries. And at the first event, I think that was 1971, the first event was in Florida, where they tried the weigh-in, and they did a delayed mortality study at that very first event. And then the next one was in Georgia. They did a delayed mortality study in Georgia. Like, every state was saying, Ray, we have to study this because we don't know that you're right. He was right. He saved the sport and created the sport because of it. If we continued at the rate we were going, we would be in trouble. We wouldn't have a sport. We wouldn't have a podcast. We wouldn't have any of this.
Yeah. Good stuff. Let's see here. All right. So this was an early question, and I have been starting questions. So, channel member Frank from Canada, he says, how much of your time are you spending reading studies, journals, articles, scientific papers?
I'll be honest, very little. I have hundreds that show up across my desk. If it's something that I don't feel like I know an expert on the subject, then I'll read it. But for the most part, I spend 14 hours a day on the phone with other experts across this country, having one-on-one discussions. I attend conferences for weeks at a time. I present on the studies I'm doing. I listen to them present on their studies, and I debate a lot of this. I am one of the scientists that feel like I'm going to give you my opinion, and you can give me your opinion, and we can debate it. And at the end of the day, we're going to shake hands and be best friends. And I can be wrong, and I can come on this show and say, here's the facts that we know today. And next month, when the facts change, I can come right back on the show and say, last month I was wrong. Here's the new information we've learned. And the more scientists we have like that, I feel like the better the sport will be. Yeah.
Great. So I'd like to do a 1-minute break.
Okay.
But when we come back, I would like to get a biologist perspective on front-facing sonar. And it'll kind of lend itself back to this harvest conversation. But, from a scientific perspective, I think this would be a good place to come back here in 1 minute. So
Perfect.
Are you ready to reel in your next home purchase or refinance? Supreme Lending's Dream Team can help guide you through the entire mortgage process, from pre-qualification to closing. We have a wide variety of home loan programs in our tackle box, including down payment assistance and first-time homebuyer options. You can ask HellaBass. He trusted us to help finance his home. Contact the Dream Team today by searching Supreme Lending Dream Team, or click the link below in the description, or scan the QR code on your screen.
All right. Well, shout out to the Dream Team for supporting this show. If you guys are, going to get a Texas home so you can have a home next to Steven and one wherever you are, then, you can hook them up and make that dream a reality. So, but yeah. So I guess from a scientific perspective, and I think you guys even use this in some of your studies, right? I think I heard you talk about how you even use this as a tool from a biology standpoint, but I don't know what Chris's point of view comes from, but he says get rid of forward facing, and I guess from a biological standpoint, is that a threat to our fisheries? Is that a big concern?
Yep. And I get this question from agencies. I get this question from anglers. I get this question from leadership at Major League Fishing. I'll tell you, there are studies that exist that look at exploitation, which is what forward-facing sonar would fall into, is how do we exploit a population? Those studies focus on fish that have a high consumptive value, catfish, crappie, walleye, or fish that have rarity to them in a long, extremely long adult life, like alligator gar, paddlefish,
Muskies.
sturgeon. Yeah, muskie. We're focused on those species because when captured, they're hard to replace in those longer living, large fish, or they're more frequently harvested at a high rate, and so our consumption is high. When it comes to bass fishing, the question I would turn back on to anybody who says, let's ban forward-facing sonar, is at what part of the catch was harm done? Because forward-facing sonar has some advantages to finding fish, to catching fish. We see that catch rates can increase in certain situations. And whenever Major League Fishing, leadership team asks me, the question is not, is catching more fish an issue? It's what happens after the fish is caught. If the fish is consumed, we're taking it home, we're harvesting it, then more fish caught equals more harvest. If it's not replaced correctly, that could be a bad thing long term, right? Especially when we can't dictate size class. In the situation of bass, especially tournament fishing, we're going to put them in the live well. We're going to cull through those fish. You're only going to have 5 fish. You're going to bring them to the weigh-in. So my question to you is catching more fish with forward-facing sonar going to create a fisheries issue? Or is putting fish in your live well creating the fisheries issue? Because you have to, if you're going to say, like, this is the problem, this is changing bass fishing and it's bad because it's removing fish, where are they removed? Every study doesn't focus on bass because from a scientific perspective, once again, we don't have a consumptive population of bass anglers. Now, you could say that forward-facing sonar is changing our ability to catch bass because we're training them to boat noise, we're training them to sonar noise, we're training them to lures, and that is true. Like, we've always known that we give a negative input bias when a fish bites a lure because we hook it, we bring it to the boat, we take it out of the water. In its brain, it doesn't think biting a red lizard resulted in me being in this boat. It just knows that I bit that thing and this happened to me, right? So next time it sees that thing, it's gonna slowly approach it and go, is that thing or not? So there is, they are going to be, especially with pressure, we're going to change the bite. That is true. But are we changing the population? The answer is no. Because we know that fishing mortality is around 10%. All fish have about a 10% mortality. Whether they're released right away, whether they're put in a live well. We do know that we do have situations where delayed mortality because of tournaments increases. So if we're going to have a debate about forward-facing sonar, I would rather have a debate about should we be putting fish in a live well. If we're really going to have a conversation about what's harming fishing, long-term bass fishing, tournament fishing, what is changing the population is not going to be forward-facing sonar. It's going to be the live well or the process of the weigh-in, because that's where the unfortunate mortality would occur. When it comes to like how can we use it as a tool, we're learning as scientists how to capture fish more efficiently, how to qualify our equipment more efficiently. I put, let's say it was 2019, 2020, I put forward-facing sonar on my electrofishing boat so that I could see, will it change how many fish I catch electrofishing? The answer was no. But what it did allow me to do was know the distance of my electricity, because I would see fish when they would become impacted, when they would swim different because the electric field got to them. I can't see the electricity on the screen. I can just see when they're impacted. So now I learn how far from the boat does the electricity go and how deep does it go. I can qualify my equipment, which means I can qualify my survey a little better. That's a benefit. There are a lot of people who, scientists who are now incorporating electrofishing into their habitat research, learning how do fish actually use our reservoirs. Because forward-facing sonar has taught us, like, the traditional subject of fish will be on points at this time of the year, they will move to, main river channel, then they will do this. Like, okay, that's a lot of that's not true. Fish have a home range. We're learning that they use that home range at various times of the day. We are now implanting radio transmitters into fish. We are then looking for fish on forward-facing sonar, using the radio transmitter to determine which fish that was in our catalog, and then watching that fish for an hour to see what does it do. Like, we are able as scientists to start to actually qualify how are fish using our fishery. I think for us, it's a benefit. I think that whenever we talk about restricting its use, that's only going to come for crappie. It's only going to come for walleye. It's going to come for these larger, longer-lived species, and it will probably come for guides before it comes for bass tournament anglers.
So Ed says debate is more of a question of sporting.
Absolutely.
I guess maybe, but I guess in when it's hunting, the for me, right, I guess my personal opinion is like the animal doesn't make a choice on whether it bites a lure. And also, like, as bass anglers, and if we're keeping this in the bass conversation as we are on HellaBass Live, like, we're all releasing such a high percentage. And I guess if you could talk about tournament, so I guess for you, I guess as an individual, if you don't feel forward-facing sonar is sporting in a tournament situation, but that really, that's a tournament decision. That is not a biological. That's not a state agency. That's not right. That's a different conversation.
Okay.
Right.
I'm gonna wear two hats on this conversation. The first hat is going to be from like a scientist perspective. I get what Edward's saying here, right? Like, I get that he's saying this may not be sporting, because what I've done is I've identified a fish. I can basically harass this fish until I manipulate it to bite. Like, I could stay on a fish, I could change lures, I could work through a process until I can get that fish to bite. My question then becomes, well, what about sight fishing on a bed? Like, is that not the same thing? And if so, like, great. If we're going to get rid of forward-facing sonar, we can't sight fish on beds. We can't use our flogger and look at smallmouth. Like those things have to also go away, because just because you have something aiding your eyes, well, flogger aids your eyes. Your sunglasses aid your eyes. Like, we can go down those paths. I think that the challenge is going to be that we as bass fishermen and biologists are probably not going to make this decision. I think this is going to come down to, once again, your regulatory authority, your state police, state wildlife police, your game wardens. There is fair chase laws in every state. It is currently being reviewed in several states on the forward-facing sonar aspect and how does it fit into fair chase, which fair chase limits the use of technology to gain an advantage on a game animal. That currently limits the use of drones. You can't use a drone to hunt or stalk an animal. I would think that a regulatory authority could interpret the use of forward-facing sonar in that same way. You're finding an animal, you're hazing that animal, you're following that animal until you can get a technique to capture that animal. I think that regulation may come, but it won't come from a biologist, and it won't come from anglers. It will come from the fair chase laws.
Right. I mean, the biology, right? They would, like, if there was a harvest issue with bass or like harvest issue for crappie, they're going to use that by creel limits, right? They'll just reduce and adjust creel limits.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. There's not an agency that's going to spend their time to do a boat ramp inspection to understand, are you a competition angler, are you a recreational angler, are you a guide? They're not going to do that. They're just going to say, well, creel limits are going to be more restrictive in either size or number or both, so that the use of this technology doesn't give you an advantage over other anglers.
Right. Or right. So like if your success rate goes up and you're hitting your harvest limit more often, then they'll just reduce the harvest limit for everybody to bring down the total to what they want.
Yeah, that's why I say that guides, like if we're going to see any krill regulation, it's going to come for guides first, because a guide, let's say you're a crappie guide, you take 2 anglers out, you're allowed 50 fish. Well, if you can do that in 45 minutes, take them back to the boat ramp, fillet those fish, grab another 2 guys, go back out, and double your money for the day. You're also doubling your exploitation for the day.
Right.
And those numbers are built into krill surveys. They're assessed every single year. Once again, that's probably a 3-year change on that regulation, because that would be driven by the fisheries agency. But if they're going to outright ban it, it's not going to come from a fisheries agency. It's going to come from the law enforcement division of your state. And they're going to use fair chase rules to do it.
Let's shift gears here. So David makes a comment and says, please help Missouri. And I'm sure, Steve, you probably know biologists in Missouri, but David feels that they don't care about bass in Missouri.
Right.
So maybe your perspective, and not specifically Missouri, but just, I think you probably have some thoughts about that, and what if David feels that way, what should he do in his state?
Man, that unfortunately, Rich, this is a tough question. I know a lot of great biologists in Missouri. Shane Bush is a Table Rock's biologist, one of the best in the country. If you want to talk about somebody who understands what a tree does for a fishery, what a brush pile does, Shane Bush. He has like 3,000 brush piles that he maintains on Table Rock alone. And I may be getting that number wrong, because it might be 5,000 for all I know. I'm trying to remember. But Shane's an extraordinary biologist, and the Missouri systems are not typical highly productive reservoirs, right? They're deep, clear systems. They grow fish at a fairly slow rate. They have 3 different species that they manage in the state, being what we would consider northern or native largemouth bass, the spotted bass, true spotted bass, as well as smallmouth bass. And the smallmouth bass are more of that river-shaped bass rather than those big lake system bass that maybe you're used to. And that's dictated mainly by environment. But those fish grow at a different rate. And the state of Missouri is trying to preserve those native species, which is admirable. They're not bringing in Florida genetic. They're not trying to push those to be 15-pound bass. The state of Missouri is working within the confines of the fisheries they have. And, if I was in charge of Missouri, there would be things that I would try to push for that are maybe a little different, because I would look at the systems and I would be like, man, what can we do to improve the smallmouth in these systems, and make the smallmouth more abundant? And a lot of that, once again, is going to fall into the conversation we've had tonight. It's going to be a habitat issue. It's going to be a harvest and regulation issue. I know that Shane has a new regulation for spotted bass this year on Table Rock Lake, because we were reviewing it whenever. So for your audience, so that they know, when it comes to Major League Fishing Bass Pro Tour, wherever we're competing at, we have to set a minimum scoreable weight, and that is done by the Fisheries Management Division, which means it boils down to me calling the biologist of the fisheries that we're going to compete on and having really in-depth conversations on what is a legal length fish and what does that legal length fish on average weigh in this fishery. So then I can kind of predict, well, if an angler catches a 1.5 pound or 2 pound fish, is that length of that fish actually legal for them to possess and therefore score into this event? So I have these conversations, and if there's a new reg change or something like that happening, they will call me and we'll have some of those conversations, because it'll impact what we do for the league. So I do get kind of some insider information early on this, but I know that they're doing a reg change on spotted bass. It has already taken place. They're doing the same things that we're talking about in the show, though. Missouri is trying to work within the confines of the reservoirs they have and their carrying capacities, the species that are present, and they're asking our anglers, how do we manipulate this population a little better? They're not systems like Texas. There's a very big difference in the pounds per acre that can be produced in Table Rock Lake versus Sam Rayburn versus Lake Fork versus OHIV. Like, you see these systems in Texas that have been stocked for 40 plus years with pure Florida bass that have a very high production level. We qualify production of a fishery. We start with how much plankton does it produce, which means we look at kind of the water color and the water clarity to determine if it's an extremely productive system or a non-productive system. And these highland reservoirs are fairly non-productive. And so they're just working in the confines that they have.
So he said, yeah, Table Rock, they seem to care about other lakes. But I think what I would get, right. But I guess, David, have you reached out to any of your local biologists, and have you had a conversation with them? And what are you forming this opinion on if you haven't talked to your local biologist?
I mean, I do agree with you there, Rich, but I also say environmentally, you have a carrying capacity. If I can raise 100 pounds of bass per acre in Texas, I'm saying that maybe I can raise 25 pounds of bass per acre in Missouri. If you want those fish to grow to be 10 pounds, that's fine. You can still do that. But you have to have 25% of the bass that I have per acre, if that makes sense, right? Like,
no, they're not
4 fish for every 1 you do.
It's a different playing field than where I live and where you live, but that doesn't mean they don't care. Doesn't mean they're not doing things. It just it'd be interesting to understand what David's perspective and where it comes from, and has he talked to a local biologist and then felt, or is he just saying that because it's some anecdotal perception based on something that he sees? I don't know.
Yeah, and I would,
because
if I'm going to give advice to anybody, Rich, on this, all of the biologists I have ever met across this country working for an agency have a couple characteristics that are similar. First, they're anglers. I've yet to meet a biologist that works in fisheries that says, I hate fishing. I didn't grow up fishing. I didn't fish in college. I don't fish today. Like, at some point in their life, they went fishing, and the bug hit them in the same way that it hit us. The difference might be that they're not competitive. They don't want to compete in a tournament. The difference may be that whenever they caught a fish, a question emerged in their brain, which was, what other fish live here? Not just this bass, but they have that same passion for fishing. That's number one. Number two, they're often service-minded individuals. They did not go into professional agency management because they were looking for popularity because they were looking for a big paycheck. They did it because they wanted to serve the community, the fishing community, and a lot of times their local community, because a lot of these biologists, they work where they grew up. And there's a few examples like Jake Norman, who moved across the country because as a kid he wanted to be the biologist that managed Lake Fork, and he worked until he could be that person. But once again, tournament angler, loves fishing. So they have those two characters. They love fishing. They're service minded. The third thing is most of the time they're not confrontational, and truthfully, they're more of a reserved personality, right? Like, so if you're going to have a conversation with your biologist, if David's going to call him up and say, "Hey, I live on Lake of the Ozarks or wherever I live, and the fishing sucks," starting the conversation that way is probably not going to lead to a productive conversation. Like, approaching these people with understanding that they're anglers like you and asking really open questions and how you can help, because they want to help. How can you help is going to lead to very productive conversations.
So I think it probably is your approach, right? And what but you should probably just be like, "Hey, this is what I'm seeing. How can we help as anglers,
Yep.
right? How can my bass club help? Is it raising money? Is it stocking habitat? Is it
Yep.
helping you with creel data?" Right? Like, these are probably the questions you should be asking to get that conversation going.
Yeah, and I see a follow-up that you posted here by David talking about not stocking. And there is kind of some misconceptions around stocking, and we can dive into that subject a little bit. I want to first talk about he wants dumb fish, those really catchable fish. And let me promise you, northern largemouth bass are dumb fish. Whenever we do studies for how aggressive are fish to lures, northern large bass are what we study. Because we can look at a lure and they will just keep coming for it and they will keep hitting it. So the fish that you have that are native, whenever you see like some of these F1 or integrated bass, they're taking the Florida because of their growth potential. And they're adding the northern to make it more aggressive, because the Florida is a more reserved bass and learns lures and is not aggressive. So the native fish that you have are very aggressive. The misconception would be that you need to stock fish to increase their population. Well, a largemouth bass on average has 2,500 eggs per pound of body weight, and they will spawn every year. So they do not spawn at one time. They spawn over a spawning window. It's a misconception that a female and a male will pair off on a single bed and they'll spawn for a week. That's not how it happens. They move in, the male makes the bed, the female comes in for about a 24-hour window or less. She drops approximately 50% of her eggs. She goes offshore. She finds another male in another bed, drops approximately 50% of her eggs, and will do that 3 to 4 times until she doesn't have eggs. And that happens over a month to maybe 60-day window, depending on water temperature. You have every year more bass spawned in the system than you need. Those fry grow to what we call a recruit. So fry, fingerling, recruit. A recruit is a pre-adult that's going to survive into the next year and become an adult. The balance is how many recruits actually make it and how many do we need. In all of our systems, largemouth are filling that void. And if we stock fish on top of that, those recruits are going to eat the fish you stock. There's very rare that you stock enough fish to make a population level difference. Chickamauga is an example across the country where they have, over a 20-year time, stocked at a rate high enough to see a genetic change in the population. But they learned very early that they have to stock either earlier in the year or at an advanced size so that those fish have a competitive advantage over the fry, the fingerlings, and the recruits. So it's a challenge to get largemouth bass changed. Now, the reason they're going to stock paddlefish, the reason they're going to stock walleye, the reason sometimes you even see agencies stocking fish like crappie is because those fish do not necessarily spawn every year. They have spawning windows that, if interrupted, they will abandon spawning. Crappie are notorious for this. If you have crappie move shallow to spawn, black or white crappie, and a cold front comes through and pushes them off, they may not spawn this year at all. And you will lose an entire year class. And so we can't treat reservoirs or even in any type of water body, you guys up north, natural lakes, we can't treat them as if every fish enters and affects the system in the same way. Largemouth bass are population manipulators. They manipulate the environment because they can eat everything. They're top end predator. They rarely get consumed by anything. They change the environment. Walleye are not the same, and they have to be treated in a different way because their survival and your catchability as an angler are determined by actually successfully stocking those fish every year.
I think, right, like whether it's Minnesota, Missouri, Texas, like unless you're going for something very specific, genetic, or you're fixing a lake that may be completely crashed out, there's really just not much benefit ROI for stocking black bass in 90+% of the scenarios, right? Like, or a high, right? Like it's just.
You can take share lunker. Share lunker here in the state of Texas, how that program works. Any fish over 13 pounds caught between January and March can be donated to the program. The biologist at Texas Parks and Wildlife will pick that fish up, take it to the hatchery. They will spawn that fish, and today they spawn that fish with a share lunker offspring that's also a pure Florida. So these are pure Florida fish. Somehow, Rich, we have went from one fishery in the state producing a 13-pound fish in the 40s to today 79 fisheries in the state producing fish over 13 pounds. And it's tied directly to the share lunker program. Their individual fish have a competitive advantage over our native bass. In the state, and Toyota on the corporate side, and the state agency have made a dedicated 40-year investment into changing the genetics of our fisheries to produce these ultimate size fish. We have not exceeded the state or the world record in this process. We've just produced more fish that are 13 to 17 pounds. There's situations
that's
where
a multi-million dollar decade strategy, which is much different than asking your local biologist, why don't you stock 10,000 bass fry in my lake?
Yeah, because 10,000 bass fry will get eaten, is the answer.
Right.
That's the answer they're going to give you most often. Now, I will also pull off my biologist hat and put on my Major League Fishing hat and tell you that there are intrinsic values to stocking bass every year that may not show up in your fisheries data. If you want to build community around your fishery, if you want to bring biologists and anglers together to a fishery to learn and to understand what's happening in the fishery, I think that stocking fish is one of the best ways to do it. Because for a low dollar investment, you can get 10,000 bass, you can have them at the boat ramp, and you could spend 3 hours together acclimating those fish, putting them out, having the conversations of maybe these aren't going to change the fishery, but they're going to bring us together. Darius is talking about the state of Tennessee stocking Kentucky Lake with Florida bass, and they're using their own research. Their research at Chickamauga over the last 30 years has proved a number of fish per acre that they feel like they can change the genetics of the water body over a long term. Once again, that's defining a goal that's then setting expectations, putting in a stocking program to do it. What we're talking about with David in Missouri is the same thing. If you want walleye in Missouri, you have to stock them every year. If you want paddlefish in Missouri, you have to stock them, I'm not going to say every year, but pretty consistently. Because the systems just aren't built to allow those river-based species to have successful reproduction every year. So it's not that the agencies aren't trying, like they're building fisheries for everybody, and there are successful hatchery programs in every state. It may just not be bass programs.
Right. And so, like, you know, if David and his bass club and his people probably want to help the biologists, it's probably habitat, it's selective harvest. There's probably in Missouri, there's probably lakes that have spotted bass problems where they've got an abundance of 10 to 12 inch spotted bass that could be harvested that could improve largemouth fishing over, right? I mean, like those are probably the conversations that are more impactful than stocking more largemouth. Probably.
I mean, I would start with habitat. So if we go back to 2,500 eggs per pound of body weight, those fish hatch and they spend the first 24 to 48 hours, depending on temperature, laying on the bottom. They don't even have a mouth at this point. They're just absorbing their yolk sac and laying on the bottom. Then swim up occurs. They swim to the surface, then they become a fry ball. The male is going to kind of guard them and move them around. This is when they're most vulnerable because every fish species can eat them. And their male is going to eat some of them. So we're reducing the number of fish in that fry ball every day. The habitat that they need is highly dense habitat. Think aquatic vegetation, think cedar trees or some sort of green tree that has a very small spacing between the stems.
Grass.
But the problem is, bass in Missouri are born in the end of March, early April. What type of vegetation do you have at that time?
Not in the big reservoirs.
Little if any. So now they've got like rock crevices, things like that. So whenever we talk about habitat, like highly dense fry habitat would be very important. So falling trees, creating brush piles, like working on those partnerships directly increases the number of bass that survive the fry stage. Now, around 3 inches or so, those bass start eating juvenile fishes. They're now out of the fry school, they're swimming around, they're hunting. They've learned how to eat plankton and zooplankton, and now they're hunting. And as they move into that transition stage, they need shoreline habitat, shoreline-based littoral habitat that's more spread out, that allows them to ambush their forage, that allows them to track juvenile fishes. It's not till the adult stage where we go back to the rock piles, the points, the things like that, that we see them as anglers. They have the fry stage when 99% of them are going to get eaten. Then they become fingerlings, then they become those recruits, then they finally become adults. And that process in Missouri is probably going to take 2 years. So you said habitat, immediately, habitat's a great plan. You put in habitat, you're going to see a change in the bass population. There's always also research. Agencies need manpower for research. That could be marked recapture studies. I don't know, somebody in this audience has caught a fish that has been tagged and may or may not have called the number that's on that tag. Whenever fish are tagged and they're not tournament fish, like there are some like bonus bucks tagging tournaments. Let's set that to the side. Whenever they're tagged by an agency, that is part of an abundance study that we call marked recapture. We know we put X number of fish tags out into the environment, and what we're wondering is over the next 6 months to year, how many of those tags are returned to us and who caught them? Was that a tournament angler? Was that a recreational angler? Was that fish released? Was that fish harvested? Because that's how we create the numbers around who is using our fisheries and how are they exploiting them. And we go right back to the beginning of this conversation on harvest, forward-facing sonar, like it all ties together at the end. But yeah, I mean, you're 100% right, David. whichever fishery you're at, or email me. My email is available online. Email me. Tell me which fisheries you're at. I will get you in contact with a biologist. You start having these conversations. Your bass club could directly impact your fisheries, but it's not going to be in the ways that you initially thought with like a stocking program. It's going to be making the fisheries function better so that bass survive to that next life stage.
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, in Minnesota, we have through our Bass Nation, we have a voluntary creel survey
Yep.
submission. Like we have our conservation director, Mickey. I don't know if he's still, but he's involved. He built in a program through our website where it's like really easy to like submit.
Mhm.
And that's probably the biggest challenge in Minnesota is the manpower to sample all of our lakes is daunting,
Impossible.
to say the
Yeah.
least, right? Impossible.
It's
So to get angler input to say, I went out for 4 hours, I caught X number of bass, between 0 to 12, 12 to 15, 15 to 20, really is, we built a really good partnership with the Minnesota DNR by providing that data to them for, whether it's fun fishing or tournaments and feeding that back in there.
I mean, I truthfully don't know how in the spring and summer you do anything because every time I'm in Minnesota, if I take the wrong turn, there's a lake that I want to fish.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I didn't know this was here. Now we got to go.
It's a good problem when it's not frozen.
Yeah, it's not frozen, but everywhere I've ever fished, you catch them. It's just a different world.
I guess kind of close to home for some of my audience and where I am, Minnesota is a place that has closed seasons. My understanding is that we are going to a year-round or we're having an expanded catch and release season. And I guess you kind of talked about New York. Is there a lot of science on the benefit for black bass in our natural lakes of like the benefit? Like what is the
especially smallmouth. Species that have delayed maturation, they don't mature at a small size or early in life. They need to stay alive for several more years. Or species that will abandon the smallmouth will abandon its nest pretty easily. So around the spawning season, there's some benefits of closed season. The winter closed season, back when we were a consumptive population, I mean, none of us were around, but in the 1800s, the late 1800s, 1890, early 1900s, even up to 1920, there was true conversations happening in Congress about black bass becoming extinct across the United States because we were consuming them at such a high rate. We had commercial fisheries, we were pulling them out. And I mean, that's one of the first things U.S. Fish and Wildlife tackled was the introduction of fish across the United States, including black bass. And that at that time, black bass were smallmouth and largemouth. That was the two species. And we had hatcheries that were putting fish everywhere. Now that we're not a consumptive population, what you're seeing is the closed season isn't as big of an issue. Because of catch and release, we know that mortality is low, single digit or up to 10% for regular angling mortality. And then we know that we kind of understand nest abandonment issues. There's kind of a caveat there of depends on the predators. When gobies are in a system, that nest predation is a lot different than if it's yellow perch. Or some sort of minnow or pumpkin seed or something like that. But we are finding out that because of how we use fisheries, that closed seasons aren't as impactful today.
I'm excited to not have to go
more
crappie fishing in the spring or drive to Wisconsin or South Dakota or Iowa. So
it's also a pretty big regulatory burden. I mean, you think of a law enforcement officer, like how do you prove that somebody's bass fishing versus crappie fishing? Especially now that so many people are using forward-facing sonar and a lot of the similar techniques.
Yeah. A mooch minnow looks a lot like a crappie bait.
Man, some of those crappie baits have caught really historically big fish.
I don't know. How are you doing on time, Steve? I don't know if you
I
got to
I
go
have
or you
all the
want
time in the world.
to.
Yeah, all the time in the world. So we haven't
All
talked
right.
about delayed mortality. We can do that. I'll let you read the question if that's what you're about to do. Sorry.
Yeah. Gabe, 10 Horse Monty. Uh, he's says, have we talked about delayed mortality and the role it plays in bass tournaments?
All right.
We kind of skirted around it, but really haven't
Yeah,
gone in on it, I guess.
yeah, it's fine. So you have two types of mortality that come during the bass tournament: instant mortality, instantaneous mortality. Those are fish that they die before the weigh-in. Usually, those fish, that is a blood loss issue most often, or an oxygen-related issue because of an equipment failure. Those are fish that obviously are dead. We culturally, in tournament angling, we have defined a dead fish based on ray scots. You put it on the bump board. If it moves a fin or a gill, it's alive. The hidden secret of kind of every large scale bass tournament is that yes, we're going to weigh that fish in as a live fish. It's going to go to the live release boat and it's going to get culled out and donated because that fish is not going to make it. Now, whenever we report mortality to an agency, we will often give them the number from the bump board as well as an additional number of dead fish that were fish that we decided would not be released because it wasn't ethical to release those fish. Delayed mortality would be those fish that were released, and due to the stress that has occurred throughout the day and the weigh-in, they have succumbed to a bacterial infection or just stress-induced hormones, but they have a mortality that falls 24 to 72 hours, 96 hours later. And you can tie these things to primarily to temperature. Water temperature is a big one. You can also add in time of year and depth. And this would be another part of that forward-facing sonar conversation is if we're driving to catch fish deeper, we have to understand that those fish may succumb to barotrauma. And barotrauma is the inflation of the swim bladder due to a pressure change. The swim bladder of a bass is not filled by a direct connection with the atmosphere. So it doesn't gulp air into its mouth and fill its swim bladder. That's what a gar does. But that is not what a largemouth or a smallmouth does. The swim bladder is filled from gas that is extracted from the bloodstream. So it's a long process. Now, whenever a fish is in 30 foot or greater, it is brought to the surface. It has an additional atmosphere pressure that is put on the swim bladder, and that makes the swim bladder expand. And that expansion takes time. And so what we see is with a live well, you put that fish in your live well, 5 minutes later, it is floating up in the live well. You have to remove a percentage of that air to get the swim bladder back to a normal size. You should always do that by fizzing the fish through the side of the fish. There's two great guides that are produced by Barb Elliott, Conservation Director for the state of New York for Bassmaster. And Barb has Barb's Best Fizzing Kit on her website, and you can purchase it, and it will show you how to fizz a largemouth or a smallmouth and give you several needles to do so. So please look up Barb Elliott and Barb's Best Fizzing Kit. You should have that in your toolbox in your boat. But you fizz that fish and you can get it upright. Now, best management practice today says you should not only fizz that fish, but then you should take 2 weights and clip those weights on the pelvic fins to force that fish to be at the bottom of the live well and remain upright. The reason you want to do that is because the fish is going to constantly try to upright itself and swim down, and it's going to have a large energy usage doing that, which is going to impact mortality because it's stressful. Whenever you put the weights on the fish, it drops them to the bottom and holds them in place, holds them upright. Delayed mortality, so it's dictated by temperature, warm temperatures. or this expansion, this barotrauma. The warm temperature side is partially controlled by oxygen because as water is warmed throughout the year, it holds less oxygen. Its affinity to hold oxygen is just reduced naturally. So you can catch a fish today, put it in your live well. Let's say lake temperature is 40 degrees. The oxygen in the lake is 14 to 15, maybe 16 parts per thousand right now. You catch that same fish in Texas in July, the water temperature is 90 degrees, and the water is 6 parts per thousand. That's part of the equation. I put that fish in the live well, I put 4 additional fish with it, and they're all respirating. And how a fish respirates is it intakes the water through the mouth. The gill filaments, water goes out the gill, and the gill filaments push blood the opposite direction. And as the blood is being pushed towards the front of the mouth, the water is coming past it, and the gill filament is grabbing oxygen out of the water and excreting ammonia. Now, whenever I put 4 fish in a live well, all of this is happening continuously. So if I don't have good recirculation, I'm not removing the ammonia from the water, and I'm not inputting new oxygen. The oxygen is already kind of at the low level. 4 parts per thousand is where bass specifically become stressed. Anything below 4, you're going to start seeing the largest fish die. So if it was started at 6 parts per thousand, I've got these 4 fish in there, they're respirating. Over time, what's going to happen is those fish are going to become more stressed. When a fish has become more stressed, they pump more water, means more ammonia going into the water. Long term, you keep them in that environment, that's what creates delayed mortality. The good news is you go through the weigh-in line, there's one more step, which is that bag. You put the fish in the bag, and if you don't have enough water, it doesn't matter what you did all day long. Because in that bag, you don't have 40 gallons of water, you have 4 gallons of water. And you have those same 5 fish in there. And they're going to use that oxygen within minutes. So a weigh-in line, you should really be, in the summer months, be pushing to be through a weigh-in line between 2 to 5 minutes. And at every tank, if that is fresh water, you should be adding water to your bag so that you're adding oxygen. If that's not, sometimes I've been to tournaments, especially like charity events or just a club event, that tank is filled with city water that's chlorinated. There's an issue there because the chlorine is actually toxic to the fish as well if they're held in it for a long term. If it's quick, you're through the line in 2 minutes, like put the water in, save the fish. If it's a longer line, you start standing there for 10 minutes, you really need to grab the bubbler and put it in your bag as well, so that you're adding even more oxygen into the bag. Once you're through the line, if it's immediate release at the boat ramp, there's some things that you can do where you add water to the bag, you slowly let those fish acclimate and swim out. Hopefully your tournament organization has a live release trailer or a live release boat. And once again, that's where we can pull fish out that just definitely aren't going to make it. But it's also in those tanks, we have pure oxygen. And so we're probably running at a 12 parts per thousand, which is more than the lake has. So they're going to recover better in those tanks than they would in the lake. We're also going to have a higher salinity, because one thing freshwater fish are always looking for is salinity. And we're going to have a higher salinity in that water. So those fish are going to go into a metabolism recovery phase in our tanks. So the live release trailers and boats really do help in reducing delayed mortality. Now the numbers, everybody always wants to know what the number is. I can find you a study that shows delayed mortality being under 10%. And I can find you a study that says delayed mortality is over 90% and everything in between. Because it's, number one, situational, dictated by that barotrauma, that time of year, that temperature, and the individual fish catch. And number two, it's kind of hard to quantify. All of these delayed mortality studies, what you have to do is either put those fish in a pen or another water body, like a pond, and then monitor how many fish die over that 24 to 72 or 96 hour time window. It is just now that we're able to actually tag those fish, use radio transmitters to follow those fish, and the tags themselves will tell us when the fish dies. We're just now getting that technology. So delayed mortality is one of those subjects. If you're looking to fight tournaments and tell people why we shouldn't have tournaments, you can find studies on delayed mortality that tell people don't have tournaments. But if you're a tournament fisherman, you can also find studies that say tournaments don't impact our fisheries at all. I think that what it really comes down to at the end of the day is we're putting 5 fish in the live well and we're competing for the 5 biggest fish possible. Which means, if we go back to the beginning of our conversation, those 5 fish are more valuable to us. They are not the ones we want to harvest. We need to take each one of us the individual steps to make sure that we do our good fish care. We need to then make sure the tournament organizations that we're competing under are doing good fish care. And at times, you need to embrace technologies that allow you to do catch, weigh, and immediate release. Because in summer months, I can take your potential delayed mortality up to 90%. And by doing catch, weight, immediate release, it goes back to what traditional fishing mortality is, a single digit number.
Yeah. And I think when you start to like break it down to the level you did, as Gabe said, the Drew Gill level of like, right? You can see where like we've all been in tournaments. You know, I think if you go to a Bassmaster Open, a Bass Nation regional, right, they're dialed. They only allow so many bags. Absolutely. They've got mesh, so your fish go into mesh. The water's the right temperature. It's got bubblers, like right. Like I mean, right. It's set up for the fish to be a success. They have a recovery pontoon where they can remove those fish that aren't going to make it, so you don't have the publicity of those fish unnecessarily floating around marinas. And right, like I mean, they do it about as good as you can. At that level, the anglers, most of them, it's not their first tournament. They understand that they need to run their live wells. They need to control the temperature, right? So I think at that level, you can see how that probably does not have a huge impact. But on the flip side, we've also been in tournaments that are run by, you know, charities that like, hey, we're just going to set up a bass tournament. Like this seems like a great idea, and they don't know. It's not that they're maliciously trying to like murder fish, but they hand out 50 bags, and all of a sudden there's a line for 30 minutes of right, and then that's where you get your 90%, like almost guaranteed, right? So
right, and then you know,
those fish are floating around because those don't go into a pontoon. They're getting dumped on the riprap, right, and they're going to float up. And that's where you're going to get the you know the bad results and the bad imagery from a publicity standpoint.
Yeah. About 2021, Gary Klein and I fished a team tournament, charity tournament, and we weren't putting.
We're not knocking charity. It could be. It doesn't have to be a charity tournament. It could be.
It doesn't have to be. But the ones like I see this as well. Like college, like a lot of colleges are trying to help their teams pay for travel with fundraisers, and they just don't have the infrastructure. A lot of small clubs and charity tournaments, they do fall into those categories. And I mean, I was standing in the way in line. Gary was like, hey, you go weigh our fish in. We're not going to win. You go weigh our fish in, and then we'll get out of here. And I stood in the line, and like Rich, I was standing there, and I was like, y'all don't have the infrastructure for this, and I'm 10 minutes in, like these fish aren't doing great. And I'm doing everything I know how to do. I mean, I haul fish professionally. You know, I'll put 100 pounds of fish, I'll put a pound per gallon, 100 pounds of fish in 100 gallons and haul them for 48 hours. No problem. I get up to the bump board, and the guy goes, you got 5 alive? And I just handed him the bag and said, I did. Because the truth is, you killed my fish. I didn't kill these fish. You killed these fish. And, you know, we weighed those fish. We went to the boat ramp. I acclimated them in. They're not going to make it. I took them back to Gary and was like, we're having fish tonight because it's just a waste of time to release these. But I see it all the time. And I do think, you know, like this Friday, I will go give a 30-minute seminar to a local bass club and talk about fish care. And we went, you know, they hired me last year to come review their club championship tournament. and just review their process. And like, we're going to go present what we saw, what they can improve on. But there's only a few of us that do this.
Yeah.
It's really, the truth is, your platform, you as a local angler, bass conservation directors for Bass Nation. The angler component of that, those bass directors are volunteers. They're not biologists for the most part. Some of them are, but not all of them. You anglers probably have more of a responsibility to take that charity tournament and say, let me help you. Let me teach you what you need, because we can continue to grow this and raise money for whoever you need to raise money for. But if we have mortality that is noticeable on Monday morning, that HOA, that state agency, somebody is going to make this a PR nightmare.
Full circle back to reduced access.
Absolutely. Yep. That's exactly right.
Yeah. And I think so. So I think a lot of times we have a long day of fishing, and maybe it didn't go great. Maybe we did awesome.
Right.
The thing we want to get done with is the weigh-in as fast as possible. So we're the ones
Absolutely
griping about not having enough bags, and I'm having to wait to get my bag. But that's actually what's important for the fish, is not to have too many fish sitting in bags. So I think people need to remember that. So.
They're better. You got roughly 40 gallons on the boat. As long as you have a recirculating pump, they'll be better 20 minutes in your 40 gallons than 10 minutes in 4 gallons of water in the bag. For sure.
Bill asks, what fish additives, are they worth the effort? Are they effective? Is there a place for them?
Yeah, it's a sensitive one. I asked Gene whenever I first started working for Major League Fishing. I called Gene and I said, listen, you've been doing this a long time. You're Bassmasters Conservation Director. You're at that time he wasn't, but he's in the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame. One of the only biologists to be in our National Bass Fishing Hall of Fame. And I asked Gene, I said, what do you do about this additive question? Because it is one of those questions that kind of weigh on us a little bit. As tournament organizations, you'll see sponsorship parts of the tournament by a live well additive. And you rarely see documentation from the leagues back of like endorsing you should use this in your live well. So it's kind of like this weird thing. And so I asked him, and he gave me this explanation, and I still use it today. Across the United States, if you're competing on a public body of water, then you are catching what is considered a food fish, a fish that can enter into the human food chain at some point. And that is regulated by the FDA in the United States. And because of that, the FDA has approved 3 chemicals for us to use on the food fish that are going to be for human consumption. And those 3 chemicals are ice, so liquid in the form, or liquid water in the form of ice. Water. Salt, and pure oxygen. Those are the only 3 things that the FDA will allow us to use on those food fish. There are some medications that are approved in certain situations. The problem with the live well additive is they're not FDA approved products. So they don't put on their label what is in them. So Gene instructed me, and I still use this answer today, to say, unfortunately, none of the additives tell me their active ingredients. So best management practice would be, as somebody who's putting chemical on a food fish, to not use them unless you know what's in them. They may work, but that's
right. So like, you're not going to endorse them. You're not also going to say they don't help the fish.
No, because
right?
you just don't know.
Anecdotally, I think many of us have seen, like, short term, it seems like it helps, but it also doesn't suggest we know what they do long term either, right?
Well, let's theorize. HellaBass live well additive. You start selling it tomorrow, and all it is salt water. So it's high concentration of salt in water, and I put that in my live well. That is going to help the fish. because freshwater fish are looking for salt ions to put into their gill filament, and that helps them excrete slime. It helps their metabolism. So that would help. But unless it says it on the label, I can't endorse it.
Yeah.
And the second you put it on the label to get it approved by FDA, then everyone knows what's in HellaBass live-well additive.
And then you don't know if you can charge more than Steve's live-well additive because everybody knows they're the...
Right. Yeah, so whenever I'm like commercially hauling fish, like if you called my company today and you're like, dude, I built 20-acre pond, I want it stocked. When you get your fish from us, your water is not going to be crystal clear. Your water is going to be blue. As long as you live in an area that we can haul these fish direct from the fish hatchery, we're going to treat those fish with the chemicals allowed for your food fish. Because we're going to hold the licenses for it. The fish hatcheries are going to have certification. Like, we're going to go through the process, and we're going to haul in additives, but they're individual ingredients that we're going to put together. We are going to use things that reduce the foam that's on the top, but we're also going to use dissolved oxygen, salt, and ice.
Yeah, I feel like we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
It's good stuff tonight. I think we answered most of the questions that came up. I'm sure we could cover a whole lot more, and we should probably do this at least every couple months or every 6 months. I think it'd be good just to hash this out and get more people thinking about fisheries management from a scientific standpoint, instead of less about emotion, more make it more objective, less subjective. I think that's always good to get more people thinking in a similar direction, and understanding that it is complicated in the end, right? It's not black and white. It's not every answer fits every fishery. So
yeah, whenever I met Bill Shedd, who was founder of AFCO. The first time I met Bill, I was asking them, they had just started that 10% pledge, and I was asking them about what drove his decision making to do that, and how do they kind of qualify projects and things like that. And Bill told me, when it comes to saltwater conservation, the problems are fairly universal across all of the world.
Sure.
So it was easy to get into saltwater and know where to put money and what would be effective. And the problem with freshwater management, and specifically bass freshwater management, is most of our issues are regional or water body based issues. So you really have to have a local expert to qualify what will actually improve this fishery. And then the lens that you define improve this fishery will be skewed by your angler's goals. So it's not just a straightforward, great, we can give this pot of money to this organization and they can fix them all across the United States. That's not how it's going to work. We have to have a lot of these hard conversations. We have to remove a lot of our own biases. And you kind of have to take the approach that I do to the science, which is, let's put the information we know today, let's make a theory about what do we think from that information. Let's test that theory. Let's debate that theory. And then if we get new information, we'll sit down and review that. And we may have been wrong. And that's okay.
And it might take us years from that. That experiment may take multiple years to whether we were right or wrong, or right. And so it's not there's very few quick fixes. There's very few easy buttons. There's and it's a moving target. Just because you think you did something right at the right time, there's Mother Nature will throw a new wrinkle in there. You'll have unprecedented cold. You'll have unprecedented heat. You'll have drought. You'll have floods. You'll have a new species get introduced that you didn't know was going to be introduced, right? I mean, there's so many things to look at. So,
I mean, yeah, if you look at like the Great Lakes systems, I haven't done it, but I'm sure I could go back to the 1980s and 1990s and read some of the scientific articles about smallmouth bass. and it probably said they were on the decline. And then all of a sudden, zebra mussels show up, gobies show up, and smallmouth bass are now unbelievably good.
And now
But
we're catching 9 and 10 pounders out of the Great Lakes.
right, but lake trout aren't doing so hot, you know, and
Yeah.
it's cause and effect. And now, if we look at those same researchers, they're saying lake trout are really suffering because of this environmental change. So you outlined it perfect, Rich. You know, we can do whatever research we want, but we are always going to play with the hand we're dealt.
Yeah. So I guess we didn't really learn much about Steve as the angler, but like, I guess if you're going to go out, if you're going to come out to Minnesota and go fun fishing, how do you want to catch them?
I love to crank. You know, so if I'm in Texas, I'm throwing a square bill around rock or wood. When
Sure.
I go to Minnesota, I've got a couple little baits that I just love. Berkeley makes the money badger. There's something about that bait. Just love grinding that. In the spring, I like a swim jig. So I'm kind of like
You're a power fisherman at heart.
Yeah,
You like to
kinda.
wind on them.
Yeah, I kind of
awesome.
do. I have a short attention span because if I do see a minnow or something I've never seen before, I'm going to start. I'm going to start trying to figure out what that is and how do we see one.
Which is nice. When you come up to Minnesota, we have a lot of clean water, so you get to see a lot of stuff swimming around. And
yeah, I'm not, or like I've caught a lot of big fish, but I'm not like a big fish hunter. I'm more like, let's just see how many we can catch and let's do it until we're just bone tired, and then we'll go get food, reminisce about how great it was.
that's up here is a good place to do that. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
We got some lakes where you can peel on them and take lunch and go peel on them again, and then sit back and talk about how many you peeled on at the end of the day.
Yeah, whenever you do this for a living, especially on the private side in Texas, we get spoiled to big fish. And I mean, I probably held this last year 100 fish over 10 pounds. It's just, you know, we electrofish them, we catch them on rod and reel. There's something special about coming north where the fish are under ice for, you know, part of the year, and they're just pissed off whenever they see a crankbait.
Cool. Well, I appreciate your time. Yeah, I think Steve's information is out there. He's on IG. His email's out there. If you got, you know, like I said, he's more than. I mean, I think he's excited to help and connect you with your local biologist. So if you're really passionate and you want to get involved, send him a note. He'll hook you up. And I think that's probably the biggest thing to take away from tonight. And maybe I'll run into you in Knoxville if I see you down there. So
definitely, I'll be busy in the mornings, but available in the afternoons.
Right on. Cool. Well, appreciate it, Steve. Hopefully everybody learned something tonight. And, you know, next week we'll probably get back to, you know, having some pro angler or somebody who's an expert, and we'll break down some technique and we'll talk about the other side as well. But we need to do more of this, and I enjoy these shows and learning as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you, brother.